So this is basically, I'm looking at the bottom side under here on that last picture. So what we need to do is that we can go out, okay, and this is actually, I bought this one, I think off Amazon. And what we can do is by using an HDMI cable and this cable, it's called a FTDI TTL 232R. And then we can take this cable. So if you want to buy one, they're about anywhere from about $7 or $8 to $15 in that area. They're not that expensive. And so what we can do is we can splice these two cables together, the HDMI cable and this cable. And this is the wiring for it. You take the HDMI bare copper ground to the FTDI black. There's the FTDI black right there. And the HDMI white to the FTDI yellow. And the HDMI orange to the FTDI orange. Okay.
How did you work this out? Was this just like trial and error, or did you find the specification somewhere?
I found specifications for it.
Wow.
So well I'm not the first one to do this. And so this actually comes from a hack that was developed and was first presented at Black Hat in like 2011. I think it was 2011. And so, but the specifications, they didn't give these specifications for the cables at Black Hat. So I had to go digging around some of the manuals for these femtocells to find out what the cabling was like. So anyways, once you have this cable, then you can access the console inside the femtocell. So the first step is we got to build the cable. That's the first step. Right? Got to build the cable that gives us a proprietary access to the femtocell through that HDMI port. That's step number one. And we're far from done, because when we get inside the femtocell, essentially we have a very small Linux kernel. Okay, it's called Monta Linux. Some of you may have heard of it before. It's used in a lot of IoT devices. So it's a company out of California that makes these really small Linux kernels put in all kinds of devices. And so that's what's inside the femtocell. But you'll find, if you'll find Monta Linux in all kinds of IoT devices, no matter what whether it be a router or baby monitor, what have you. These all use very small Linux. And so this is once again, I'm going to plug Learning Linux if you want to be a hacker, right? So
let's see which book should you read? But there's more.
There's more, yes. So that book, we're really looking at Linux as how to use it as an attack tool. But the truth of the matter is that all these IoT devices also have Linux. So you get inside one of these devices, and if you don't know Linux, you can't find your way around, right? You don't know how to find anything, what to do with it. You need to know Linux to be able to do this. It ends up
Linux is like speaking English, let's say in the US or the UK. It's like a basic skill that you have to have these days in IT, I think. I
agree. It's a basic skill you have to have. So once you're inside, now you got this Monta Linux, but it doesn't have a bash shell. So it's not like what we're accustomed to, right? And so it becomes pretty hard to work with. Once again, this is a pretty complex hack, but it can be done. So
it's just nice to see, because sorry to interrupt again. It's just nice to see, the Mr. Robot example and you actually doing it and showing, is it real or is it just a movie scene? And it's nice to see you, actually showing us how to do it.
It's real, but it's not easy, right? And that's once again, we've always talked about Mr. Robot and the time frame that he works in. And this one, if they were already familiar, one of the team was already familiar with it. Yeah, it might be able to get done in a few days that they had, but it's not easy. Right. So once we're inside, we've got the console. We've got to get root access. And so here's the two models that Verizon uses. And these are two methods to escalate privileges to get to root. So the one I have is this one right here, which is the easier one. And Verizon now says that this no longer works. But it doesn't matter because we can just go buy the old ones that have never been updated off eBay or any place and get root access. And so once we got root access on these things, right? So we now are in, we've got root access on the Linux inside this device. Unfortunately, even with root access, it's not really functional. We can't do a whole lot with it. And so if you watch closely on Mr. Robot, you'll see that this comes up. See the screen right here? This is OpenWRT. These are Linux images that can be used on IoT devices. So if you've got some hardware, you can go ahead and download the Linux to install and flash into the IoT device. Here's all the hardware this has been going on for years, and very few people are familiar with it. Now you can just download the software. It's open source software for a particular device, for any device. And this is what they do, is that basically they take this femtocell and now they go ahead and flash it with a Linux operating system that they have developed themselves, or they've basically taken the image from here and made some alterations to it. In the show, what happens is that Elliot actually puts some malware. He puts malware, it's kind of a well-known browser RCE exploit into the femtocell that would then put the shell code onto the phones. What I'm most interested in from this perspective is being able to eavesdrop on the traffic. So we don't need to actually have an RCE. We don't need to have any exploit at all to be able to listen in and watch the traffic. So Elliot is trying to infect the phones, but to be able to listen in, there's still a few things that we need to do. You can see all of the data traffic, okay, it all goes unencrypted, but the SMS traffic and the phone traffic, you have to be able to decode that traffic because it's all encoded, but that's publicly available information that you can decode. It's really kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing here today. I'm just trying to give you the outlines of what can be done to be able to build essentially a small spy device, a mini stingray that gives you access to all of the mobile traffic in the area. Now, these stingrays are kind of low power, so the target has to be within 15 feet of the the femtocell to be able to connect to it, but they can then travel within 50 feet of the femtocell and they'll still be connected to that femtocell. So the initial connection has to be within about 15 feet. So what is that? About 5 meters, and then about 16 meters in that range. They travel throughout the room or the office. You can pick up all of their traffic. So it's kind of giving you the bare outlines of what we have to do, but there's a lot of work involved here. Probably, the first step, of course, is getting that cable made so you can get access to the device, and then you have to go ahead and flash it. You've got root access, and then you got to flash it with a new Linux kernel. Right? And then once you have new Linux kernel, then you have access to all of the traffic that's going over the device.